My daughter smiled as she handed me a slice of pecan cake, and 5 minutes later, her husband stopped breathing. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked once, twice, and then everything went silent. I remember the sound of his fork hitting the plate, that tiny metallic ring that still lives inside my chest. He just said, "Best cake I've ever had, Lydia." And then the air left the room. His chair fell backward. My daughter screamed his name, and I froze. For a heartbeat, I didn't even understand what was happening. He was on the floor, his lips turning gray, the veins in his neck rising like ropes. Lydia shook him, begging, "Mark, breathe. Please breathe." I grabbed the phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands that couldn't press the right buttons. The operator's voice felt miles away. All I could say was, "My son-in-law, he's not breathing. Please." The smell of pecans and sugar filled the air, sweet, heavy, and cruel. I swear, that scent still follows me everywhere. When the paramedics burst through the door, everything blurred into flashes. The thud of boots on the hardwood, the snap of gloves, the sharp hiss of the oxygen tank. Someone shouted, "Ma'am, we need space." But how do you step away from your own life, falling apart? They carried him out on a stretcher, his face pale against the red light flashing on the ambulance doors. My daughter's hands were shaking so hard, she couldn't even tie her shoes. She just kept whispering, "It's my fault. It's my fault." Outside, the night looked strangely calm. A soft Georgia evening, the sound of crickets, neighbors peeking through their windows as the sirens faded. I stood there on the porch, still holding the knife we'd used to cut the cake. It glinted under the porch light. Clean, sharp, innocent, just like I thought our lives were. I didn't know then that this would become one of those grandma stories people talk about in hushed voices. You know, the kind that starts with laughter and ends with a silence you can't ever fill. The police came before sunrise. They asked simple questions. What was in the cake? Who baked it? Did he have allergies? And I heard my own voice say, "My daughter baked it. She made it from scratch." It was supposed to be a good day. Her first visit home after months. A family dinner, a little happiness for a mother who thought her child was finally settled. Instead, the kitchen looked like a crime scene of love. Half-eaten cake on the table, spilled coffee, a chair overturned, and a single pecan rolling slowly across the floor until it stopped at my feet. I still remember bending down, picking it up, and realizing my hands smelled like almonds and fear. Later, at the hospital, the doctor said the words no one should ever hear. "He's in critical condition. We'll do everything we can." That night, I sat alone in the waiting room. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air conditioning too cold. My daughter was inside, shaking, covered in his blood and frosting. I wanted to hold her, but something inside me had already cracked, because somewhere, deep down, a quiet, terrible question was whispering, what if she knew? I tried to shut it out, tried to remind myself this was my daughter, my own flesh and blood. But every heartbeat echoed that question louder. When dawn came, the doctor stepped out, his face unreadable. "He's alive," he said, "but he's not waking up. Alive, but not awake. Just like the rest of us," I thought. If you stay till the end, you'll understand why I no longer call it the cake, but the mirror. Because sometimes the sweetest things we make are the ones that show us who we really are. And this is one of those family drama stories you find on PT Family Drama Stories. Except this one isn't fiction. It's mine. The hospital smelled like bleach and broken prayers. I sat in a chair that squeaked every time I breathed. Somewhere down the hall, Machines kept their rhythm, beeping like distant heartbeats, trying to hold on. My daughter, Lydia, was behind the double doors. Her husband, Mark, lay somewhere between this world and the next. When the doctor came out, he didn't look at me right away. He held a clipboard, like it was too heavy. Then he said words that didn't feel real. We found traces of cyanogenic compounds, something extracted from bitter almonds. It's not conclusive yet, but we've alerted the authorities. Cyanogenic. Authorities. The words clanged in my head like dropped pans. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Are you saying, I finally whispered, that someone poisoned him? The doctor looked at me the way people look at fragile things they might have to break. We just have to find out where it came from. That night, 2 detectives came. They asked questions that made the air heavy. They took the remains of the cake, the utensils, even the plates. And when one of them looked at Lydia's baking tools, he quietly said, "We'll need to take these for testing." Lydia's face went blank. Not shocked, not angry, just hollow, like a door closing from the inside. When they left, she turned to me. "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong." And for a moment, I believed her completely, because that's what mothers do. We believe our children even when the whole world stops believing in them. But then, the questions began. Neighbors asking what happened, reporters calling our landline. Someone online started a hashtag, Jakdut Poison Cake. People I'd known for decades now looked at me with that same expression, pity mixed with curiosity. They whispered when I walked by the grocery store. Someone even left a note in my mailbox. "You should have raised her better." At first, I tore it up. Then, I taped it back together and kept it in my drawer, like some kind of proof that maybe they were right. That's the thing about shame. It doesn't knock. It moves in quietly, rearranges your furniture, and suddenly, you can't remember what home felt like before it arrived. The police called Lydia for questioning. They said it was routine, but nothing about this felt routine. When she came out of the station hours later, her eyes were swollen from crying. "They think I tried to kill him," she whispered. "Mom, they think I tried to kill my husband." I wanted to scream that it wasn't true. I wanted to gather her up like I used to when she was 5, after she'd scraped her knee and thought the world had ended. But she wasn't 5 anymore, and this wasn't a scraped knee. That night, I sat on her old bed, looking around her childhood room. The purple curtains, the stuffed rabbit she couldn't sleep without, and a picture of her in 1st grade, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at me with frosting on her cheek. I whispered to that picture, "How did we get here?" The next morning, news vans parked outside our gate. The headline ran on local TV. "Homemade cake sends husband to ICU. Possible poisoning." They showed our mailbox, our porch, my front door. It felt like someone had broken into my life and stolen the version of us that was still innocent. The church ladies stopped visiting. Even the pastor's wife looked away at the market. Everyone had an opinion, and no one had the truth. That evening, I went to the hospital again. The nurse told me Lydia wasn't allowed in Mark's room anymore. For procedural reasons, she sat outside, alone, her eyes red and her hands clasped, like a child praying for something she no longer believed in. "Mom," she said softly, "I just wanted to make him something special. You know how he loved pecan pie. I wanted to surprise him." And she started to cry in that soundless way that mothers know too well. The cry that means guilt, even when you're not sure what you're guilty of. I wanted to hold her, but I didn't, because something inside me was breaking in 2 directions at once. Half of me still wanted to protect her. The other half wanted to shake her and ask, "What did you do?" People call these grandma stories, tales about families falling apart and finding their way back. But when you're living one, It's not a story. It's survival. And the hardest part of any family drama story isn't the tragedy itself. It's the moment you realize the villain might be someone you love. That night, I went home and sat in the dark kitchen. The smell of pecan and sugar still lingered, even after I scrubbed every corner. I stared at the empty cake stand, the one she'd bought me last Christmas. I thought about the day she gave it to me. "For your pies, Mom, so you'll always bake." Back then, her hands smelled like flour and laughter. Now, they smelled like latex gloves and police ink. I looked at the ceiling and said a prayer that wasn't really a prayer, just a tired whisper. "Please, don't let it be true." Then I remembered something Orion Sage once said in a story I'd heard on the PT Family Drama Stories channel. "Truth doesn't destroy love. It only shows you what kind of love it was." I wasn't ready for truth yet. I just wanted my daughter back. If you're still here, thank you. It means this grandma story is speaking to something inside you. Tap like or comment. Yes, if you've ever tried to believe in someone, even when everything told you not to. Because that's what this part of the story is about. Not the cake, not the poison, but the fragile, desperate hope that love might still be stronger than doubt. The rain came that night without thunder, just a slow, steady tapping on the tin roof of the old wooden house. The kind of rain that makes silence louder. I sat by the window with the lights off. The lamp in the corner had burned out 2 nights ago, but I hadn't bothered to replace the bulb. I told myself I liked the dimness. It made everything softer, even shame. The radio played an old country song, one my husband used to hum while fixing the porch swing. It was Lydia's favorite too, back when she was small and her feet couldn't reach the pedals. I could almost see her then, 6 years old, spinning in circles on that porch, flour on her cheeks, laughing while her father clapped along. Back then, life felt simple. Dinner at 6, bedtime stories, a kiss goodnight. Now, every tick of the wall clock reminded me how long it had been since I'd seen her smile without fear behind it. The phone had stopped ringing. No one from church had called since Sunday. They said prayers for the family involved, not for us. When I went to the grocery store, people stared like I was contagious. Mrs. Turner, who used to bring me peach cobbler every Easter, turned her cart down another aisle when she saw me. Even the cashier, sweet young Emma, smiled too much. Like she was afraid, if she didn't, she might say the wrong thing. Rumors spread faster than mercy. They said the poison came from my kitchen, that maybe Lydia got the idea from one of my old cookbooks, that maybe I'd helped her. One afternoon, a reporter showed up at my gate. He was young, polite, holding a microphone like a shield. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to make a statement about your daughter's involvement?" I shut the door without a word. But later, when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked guilty, even without proof. That night, I made myself coffee and didn't drink it. The smell of roasted beans reminded me of the hospital's waiting room. Everything did. I turned on the TV for company, only to regret it instantly. There it was, our porch again, on the evening news. A headline in white letters crawled across the screen. "Wife suspected in poisoning. Husband still in coma." They showed the same photo of Lydia from her college graduation. Her smile looked proud, free, untouched by the world. The anchor said, "Authorities are investigating the possibility of deliberate contamination in a homemade dessert." My chest tightened. I wanted to shout that she was a good person, that she volunteered at the shelter, that she sent money to hurricane victims. But all I could do was stare at the screen, whispering, "That's my daughter. When the report ended, I left the TV on just for the noise. I needed something, anything, to drown out the voice inside me, asking the one question I couldn't face. What if I raised her wrong? I walked through the house, touching things I'd once been proud of. The piano, the framed family photos, the cross above the door. All of them suddenly felt like evidence of a life I might have failed. In the kitchen, the smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with pecans that wouldn't wash away. I ran my hands over the countertop, remembering how I used to tell Lydia, always clean as you go. That's how you keep things from sticking. And now everything was sticking. Memories, guilt, fear. A week passed before anyone came to visit. It was Pastor Collins. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, voice gentle. "We're praying for your family, Evelyn." "Thank you," I said, though the word felt too big for my mouth. He hesitated, then added, "Some of the ladies feel it might be better if we wait a bit before you join Sunday service again. Just until things settle. Things settle, like dust after a storm that never ends." When he left, I sat on the porch swing, listening to it creak the way it had when my husband built it. He'd said, "This will hold up longer than both of us." And he was right. He was always right. I missed his steadiness, the way he could calm me with a hand on my shoulder and a soft, "It'll be all right, Evie." But he wasn't here. Just me, this porch, and a storm that refused to pass. Days blurred. I stopped cooking, stopped answering calls. Even my own reflection avoided my eyes. Every night I dreamed of Lydia as a little girl again, running to me after a nightmare, asking if monsters were real. And I'd tell her, "No, honey, monsters aren't real." Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe monsters were real, and maybe they grew up wearing our faces. I tried praying again, but the words got tangled between apology and accusation. "Lord, if she's innocent, protect her. And if she's guilty, forgive me for not seeing it coming." One evening, I gathered all of Lydia's childhood drawings from the attic. Crayon houses, stick figures, crooked hearts. I laid them out across the floor. There she was, sunshine yellow hair, a family of 3, smiling. In every drawing, she'd given her father big hands and me a blue dress. She'd written, "Mom bakes love." Now the words felt like a cruel prophecy. The next morning, I went to check the mail. Bills, coupons, and a small white envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed note. "Tell the truth before someone else does." My knees almost gave out. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching from the street. No one was there, just the wind moving through the trees like a whisper of accusation. I tore the letter, but the words stayed. They didn't need paper to live. They had my mind. By the 3rd week, I stopped counting days. The news moved on to other tragedies. People forgot, except me. At night, I sat by the radio again. The same old song played, my husband's song, the one that used to mean love, now sounding like loss. "Maybe I raised her wrong," I said aloud this time. The sound of my own voice startled me. It had the crack of confession in it. Maybe I was too soft or too proud. Maybe I should have seen something I didn't want to see. Silence answered back. I picked up the photo of her graduation again. Her smile looked different now, like she knew something the rest of us didn't. For the first time, I let myself wonder, just wonder, if the police were right. And then came the guilt for even thinking it. That's what motherhood does to you. It turns your heart into a courtroom where love and doubt take turns as the judge. If you're still listening, thank you for staying with this grandma story. It's not an easy one. Hit or comment. I understand if you've ever loved someone so fiercely that it hurt to even imagine they could be wrong. Because that's where I was, in that quiet space between loyalty and truth, where every breath feels like betrayal. The night before Lydia's next hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked into the kitchen and stood by the window. The moonlight hit the empty cake stand. For a moment, it looked like glass filled with ghosts, and somewhere, deep inside me, a voice whispered words I didn't yet understand. The truth isn't coming for her, Evelyn. It's coming for you. I didn't know whose voice it was then. But later, I would remember those words, and the man who said them, when Orion Sage finally walked into my story. The county jail sat on the edge of town, past the railroad tracks and the fields of dry grass that used to glow gold in the summer. Now they just looked gray, like the whole world had forgotten its color. I parked outside and sat there for a while, watching the rain draw nervous fingers down the windshield. The wipers squeaked back and forth, steady but pointless, like they were trying to erase something that wouldn't come off. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. The deputy at the front desk was polite, in that tired way people get when they've seen too many sad faces. He handed me a clipboard and said, "She'll be brought out in a few minutes. You'll have 10. 10 minutes. That's all I got with my daughter." When Lydia appeared, she looked smaller somehow. Her shoulders rounded, her hair tied back. No makeup, just the pale shadow of who she used to be. There was a glass wall between us, thick and unforgiving. We both picked up the black phone, that old kind with a coiled cord. It smelled faintly of metal and dust. Her first words were barely a whisper. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt him." The sound of her voice broke me open. All the words I'd rehearsed, about staying strong, about praying, fell apart before they reached my mouth. "Then why, Lydia?" I asked. "Why did this happen?" She shook her head, tears pressing against the corners of her eyes. "They keep saying I used something I shouldn't have. But I didn't, Mom. I swear I didn't." "They found traces of poison," I said, quieter than I meant to. "It came from the cake." "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't." She stopped, pressed her forehead against the glass. "You believe me, don't you?" And there it was, the question that split my heart clean in two. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I believed anymore. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. "Lydia," I said, my voice cracking, "I'm trying." For a long moment, we just sat there, breathing through the static on the line. Her hand pressed against the glass, palm to palm with mine, divided by cold transparency. That's when I realized belief isn't something you hold. It's something you keep trying to pick up, even after it keeps falling. The deputy tapped the glass. "Time's up." And just like that, she was gone again. A door closing, a key turning, footsteps fading down the hall. When I walked back out to the car, the rain had turned heavy. The kind that soaks through your coat, and skin, and bones, all at once. I sat behind the wheel, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. The same hands that had taught her to tie her shoes, to bake, to write her name. The same hands that once clapped for her at piano recitals. Now they just shook. I drove home slow, careful. The roads were slick, the sky darker than it should have been for 4 p.m. When I stepped into the house, it was colder than usual. Maybe the heater had stopped working, or maybe warmth just didn't belong there anymore. The chair she used to sit in at the kitchen table was empty. The plate she'd used that night still sat in the sink. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. I touched the back of the chair, tracing the grain of the wood like it might answer me. "If I hadn't asked her to bake that cake," I whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and sour. If I hadn't asked, maybe none of this would have happened. The storm outside rattled the windows, as if the world was agreeing with me. I walked to the living room, where my husband's photograph still sat on the mantel. Him in his Sunday suit, eyes kind, smile sure. The frame was dusty. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd cleaned it. "You died believing we'd be okay," I said, my voice breaking. "You trusted me to keep her safe. And look what I've done." The lights flickered. For a second, the room went black, and I could swear I heard his voice. Not words, just the deep hum of memory. I sank to my knees on the rug, pressing my forehead to the floor, sobbing the way you only do when there's no one left to see you fall apart. It wasn't a cry for help. It was surrender. I don't remember how long I stayed there. Just the feel of the cold floor under my palms, the taste of salt and dust and regret. At some point, I must have fallen asleep right there, because when I woke, the rain had stopped, but everything still dripped. The eaves, the window panes, the inside of me. I tried to stand, but the world tilted. The room spun once, twice, then went gray. My knees buckled. I caught the edge of the counter and nearly went down. For a moment, I thought, so this is it. This is how you disappear. The thought didn't scare me. It almost felt like relief. But then I saw it. The little ceramic cup Lydia had made me in 3rd grade, sitting on the counter. It was crooked, the paint chipped, but it had survived everything. On the side, in faded letters, she'd painted one word: love. And somehow, that tiny, imperfect thing kept me standing. I sat at the kitchen table and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket that didn't quite reach my feet. I looked at the clock, 3:11 a.m., then at the door, still closed, still waiting. People talk about grief like it's a wave that hits you all at once. But they're wrong. Grief isn't a wave. It's the ocean you wake up in. And no one ever taught you how to swim. Outside, a stray dog howled, low and long. The sound cut through the night like a thread unraveling. I reached for the phone out of habit, to call Lydia, to call anyone, then remembered there was no one to call. The phone sat silent. Even silence gets tired of itself, eventually. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands trembled too much to hold it steady. The glass slipped, shattered on the floor. The sound echoed in the small house, sharp and final. I looked down at the pieces, glinting in the faint light, and for some reason, I started laughing. That awful broken laugh that sounds closer to crying, because everything, the glass, the cake, our lives, had shattered the same way. Too fast, too sharp, too soon. When the laughter finally died, I whispered again. If I hadn't asked her to bake that cake, and the words felt like they were cutting my throat on their way out, I sank down beside the broken glass, too tired to move, too empty to cry. And for a moment, a terrifying, peaceful moment, I thought about just closing my eyes and never waking up. But then, the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, thin, pale, quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like warmth brush my cheek. Maybe it was the sun, maybe it was mercy. I didn't know yet that it was the beginning of something else, a different kind of morning, and the day I would meet Orion Sage. Morning found me at the hospital, the one with the brick courtyard and the little cafe tucked beside the chapel. The coffee there always tasted burned, but the cups were warm, and that was enough. I sat where the glass walls looked out on a narrow garden. Hostas, a leaning maple, 3 terracotta pots with orchids that looked too delicate for a place like this. A man in a light linen jacket was tending one of the pots, misting the leaves like he had all the time in the world. He wasn't hospital staff. No badge, no hurry. Just careful hands and a face that seemed rested, somehow, in a building built for unrest. He glanced up and noticed me trying not to stare. "Good morning," he said, voice low, uninvolved with the hurry around us. I nodded. "I don't know if it is." He smiled in that way. People smile when they've already heard an answer 1,000 different ways. He set down the spray bottle, wiped his fingers on a folded handkerchief, and took the chair at the table next to mine. Close, but not too close. Respectful of air people need when they're breaking. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the only kind of morning you get is the kind where you're still here." The espresso machine hissed. Somewhere down the corridor, a code alert murmured, then settled again. I stared into my coffee and saw nothing in it that could save me. "My son-in-law's upstairs," I said. "Alive, but not here." He nodded once. "I'm sorry. And my daughter—" I stopped, the word catching like a thread on a nail. "Everyone thinks she—" I couldn't finish. He let the silence be silence. Then, "You're carrying 3 weights at once. His body, her name, and your own heart." I blinked. People usually reached for sympathy. He'd reached for math. He looked back at the orchids. "The thing about pain," he said, as if continuing a thought we'd started yesterday, "is it repeats, not to punish us." His eyes met mine, steady, unflinching, but to remind us of the pain we once caused. My hands tightened around the paper cup. "I didn't cause," I started, then realized he hadn't said you. He'd said we. He nodded at the glass. "You wouldn't believe how many people come sit by this window. They all tell different stories, but underneath, the melody is the same. The heart remembers what the mind tries to misplace." I wanted to argue with him. About God, about mercy, about the kind of world where my daughter could be accused of something she swore she didn't mean. Instead, what came out was smaller. "I thought I raised her right," I said. "And now I don't know what's true." He folded the handkerchief again. "Truth doesn't erase love. It reveals the parts of it that need to grow up." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like the first sentence in days that didn't bruise on contact. He reached for the orchid again, turned the pot a 1/4 inch. "Pain is a mirror," he added, almost to the plant. "You can break it, but it still shows you." I let the words sit. Pain is a mirror. You can break it, but it still shows you. My breath came a little deeper, without asking permission. "I keep replaying the kitchen," I said. "The chair falling, the fork, the cake knife in my hand. I keep thinking if I move one thing in my mind, the memory will stop being what it is." He shook his head gently. "Memory is honest. Interpretation is the liar." He glanced at the cup I hadn't sipped. "Let me ask a different question. Before this day, was there a hurt your daughter never looked at long enough to learn from? The glass, the humming lights, the white halls, all of it pressed in. A face surfaced, half remembered. A name, maybe. A winter. A fight I didn't understand at the time. She'd come home from college once, eyes swollen, jaw set. I'd said, 'Give it time.' She'd said, 'Time is the problem.'" I swallowed. "There was a time, years ago. She left someone who needed her, roughly. I thought she was being young. I thought she'd grow out of it." "And did she?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe she grew around it." He nodded, the way teachers nod when a student gets close to something true. He misted the leaves once more. When we don't understand our own hurt, we outsource it. It shows up as somebody else's worst day. I felt my spine straighten, as if my body recognized a door where my mind had seen only walls. "Who are you?" I asked finally. He smiled, not with secrecy, but with that gentle embarrassment good people have about their own names. "People who watch PT family drama stories sometimes call me Orion Sage. I prefer Orion. He tilted his head. Names are only names. Patterns are the thing. I'd heard that name, Orion Sage, once, in a story my friend sent me after her sister got sober. I'd dismissed it as just another voice telling other people how to live. Now the voice was attached to hands that turned flower pots by a quarter inch and made sentences that didn't lean on cliches. I'm Evelyn, I said. Evelyn, he repeated, holding it carefully. Tell me what you'd be willing to see if it meant your daughter could be free. Truly free. Not just legally. I looked down at my fingers. They were a little sticky from the coffee lid. I wiped them with a napkin I didn't remember picking up. I'd see anything, I said, even if it's me. He nodded once, almost like a bow. Good. Then look here. He gestured, not at me, not at the orchids, but at the glass wall itself. The garden reflected faintly in it. Leaves over leaves, my face over my face. Every mirror tells two stories. The thing in front of it and the light behind it. Most of us stare at the thing and forget the light. I don't know how to change light, I said. You don't, he agreed. You change how open the window is. He turned the pot another quarter inch. You make room. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. What does that mean for Mark? For Lydia? It means, he said. Ask a better question. Not, did she poison him? The system will ask that. Ask, where did the poison get its chance? Not in the batter, but in the story that allowed this day to form. I thought of Lydia's stubbornness, the way she hated admitting she was wrong, the way I praised her for being strong when maybe she was just afraid. I thought of my own silences, how easy it had been to say, she'll figure it out, and go back to my dishes. What if the answer hurts? I asked. Then it's probably honest, he said. But honest hurt heals. The other kind just replicates. He stood, as if to go, then paused. Evelyn, I'm not here to fix your life. I'm here to widen it, so you can walk through it without tripping on the same furniture. A laugh escaped me, brief and disobedient. You talk like a man who's broken a few tables. Oh, I have, he said, amused, and apologized to the people who set them. He took a step back toward the orchids. There's something Lydia hasn't faced, not for you to drag out of her, but for you to make safe enough for her to bring. Safety isn't denial. Safety is light. What do I do? I asked, the question tiny and huge at once. 3 things, he said, counting them softly on his fingers. 1, stop rehearsing the scene where you're to blame. It keeps you from seeing the scene where you can help. 2, choose one ordinary kindness you and your daughter can do for someone no one is watching. Start small. Start soon. That changes the room you're both standing in. 3, when she finally speaks the real past, listen to the whole sentence. Don't edit. I nodded. They sounded like instructions for a kitchen I could work in. Clear counters, exact measures. He lifted the spray bottle again. And one more thing. If you need to cry, cry fully. Half crying keeps pain in the house. Full crying shows at the door. I thought of the rug at 3:11 a.m. The glass. The dog howling. I've been bad at doors, I said. You're here, he said. That's a door. He set the bottle down, wiped his hands once more, and glanced toward the corridor that led to the ICU. I'll be around, he said. Not to hover, just to water plants. Orion, I said, stopping him. If pain is a mirror, what if the image is ugly? He met my eyes. Then you are closer to beauty than the person who refuses to look. He turned, then paused one last time, almost as if he'd remembered something he liked giving away. You know how people talk about grandma's stories, the kind that live longer than the people who tell them? A small smile. They last because someone, somewhere, chose to see the whole reflection. He walked back to the orchids, adjusting a leaf that had drooped under its own weight. I stared at my coffee until the top cooled to a thin skin. The world looked the same. Beeps, footsteps, hushed urgency. But inside the same world, the furniture felt moved. If you're still here with me in this family drama story, thank you. If what he said about mirrors makes sense in your own life, tap like or tell me in one word below. What do you see? Sometimes saying it out loud is how the light finally gets in. I stood, spine taller than when I'd sat. I didn't know how to forgive anyone yet. I didn't know how to clear my daughter's name. I didn't know if Mark would ever open his eyes. But I knew this. Before I asked Lydia for answers, I would make a room where answers weren't punished. I would sit beside her, and I would let the whole sentence live. And when the afternoon light shifted across the glass, I saw it there, 2 reflections, mine and hers, waiting for someone brave enough to stop breaking the mirror and finally read it. The day after I met Orion Sage, I woke with the same dull ache that had followed me for weeks, but something in it had changed. It was still pain, but not the kind that dragged me under. It felt like a bruise I could finally press without flinching. I spent the morning sitting by the window, watching sunlight crawl across the floorboards. The house was still quiet, still cold, but the air had shifted. Orion's words played on a loop in my mind. Pain is a mirror. You can break it, but it still shows you. For the first time, I stopped trying to sweep the shards away. I looked. By afternoon, I was back at the jail. The deputy at the desk knew me now. He didn't ask for ID anymore, just gave me the same sad half smile. 10 minutes, Mrs. Carter. Inside, Lydia sat in the same seat, same gray sweater, but her eyes were different, less defensive, more empty. The kind of empty that comes after a storm has blown through and left nothing standing. She picked up the phone before I even sat down. "You came back," she said, voice small. "I said I would," I answered. We just looked at each other for a while. The silence between us felt alive. "I met someone yesterday," I finally said, "at the hospital." Her eyebrows lifted a little. "Who?" "A man named Orion Sage." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe recognition, or just the sound of a name that didn't carry judgment. "He said something that's been following me around," I continued. "He said, pain repeats, not to punish us, but to remind us of the pain we once caused." Lydia's eyes filled fast. She looked down at her hands, the phone cord twisting between her fingers. "Then I guess I'm getting my reminder." "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat tightening. She hesitated, then looked straight at me, her voice barely holding together. "There's something I never told you, Mom, about before I met Mark." And just like that, the world shifted again, like the moment right before lightning, when everything holds its breath. 10 years earlier. Flashback. It was winter, sharp and blue, the kind of cold that makes breath look like smoke. Lydia was 22, still in college, full of plans and caffeine. She'd met Caleb Monroe in the campus library. He was older by a few years, working nights at a diner to pay his tuition. He had the kind of smile that made people want to tell the truth. They fell fast, the kind of love that glowed reckless and pure. He'd walk her home after every shift, even when snow clawed at his coat. He used to say, "You make life taste like Sunday morning." But by spring, something changed. Caleb's energy drained. He'd cough through entire sentences, hide the tremor in his hands. The doctor said it was a heart condition. Serious, but treatable if he rested. Resting wasn't an option. He kept working, afraid of bills, afraid of losing her. And Lydia, terrified of watching someone she loved get sick, started backing away. At first, it was little things. Missed calls, excuses, study group tonight. Then, days turned into weeks. Caleb wrote her a letter. He told her he understood if she was scared, but he needed to see her. She read it, folded it neatly, and left it unanswered. When he called, she silenced the phone. When he texted, she typed replies and deleted them. And one night, after closing the diner, he collapsed in the parking lot. His co-workers found him beside his car, a half-finished letter in his pocket. He survived, barely, but left school. She never saw him again. Lydia told herself it wasn't her fault. She told herself people break up all the time. But every time she heard sirens, every time she passed a hospital, guilt brushed her shoulder like a ghost, checking if she still remembered. Back in the visiting room, Lydia was trembling. "I thought it was gone, Mom, that I'd buried it deep enough. But when Mark got sick that night, it was like the universe had flipped the scene and put me on the other side of it." Her voice cracked, and the tears finally came, the kind that shake you so hard they pull memories loose. "I kept hearing Caleb's voice. I kept seeing him on the ground, and I thought, God, not again, not because of me." I pressed my hand to the glass, the way I had last time. She didn't mirror me this time. She just stared at her lap, sobbing into her sleeves. "Mom, I didn't poison Mark, but I did ignore Caleb when he needed me. I left him when things got hard. I thought I'd moved on, but maybe life didn't." The words hit me like a physical thing. All the nights I'd told myself she was strong, independent, fearless, I realized now she'd just been running from the echo of that parking lot. I could almost hear Orion's voice again, calm and sure. Guilt doesn't disappear. It reincarnates as life's next lesson. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was my daughter's life. "Lydia," I said, choking on her name, "why didn't you tell me?" She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "Because I didn't want you to see what I saw. That I could walk away from someone who needed me. That I wasn't the person you thought I was." "You're still my daughter," I said. "Then why do you look at me like you don't know me anymore?" I flinched, because she was right. I had been looking at her like a stranger in my house. "Because," I said honestly, "I don't know how to love someone when I don't know where to put the blame." That cracked something open between us. She covered her mouth and cried harder. "I'm so sorry, Mom. So am I." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The line hummed softly, the sound of electricity carrying every word we didn't know how to say. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think this is punishment?" And I heard Orion again, as clear as if he were standing behind me. "Not punishment, correction. Life is merciful enough to give you another chance to do it right." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, sweetheart," I said. "It's not punishment. Maybe it's the world asking you to stay this time." She looked up, eyes red but lighter somehow. "Do you think I can?" "I think you already are." When I left the jail that day, the air outside felt different. Still heavy, but alive. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that caught the afternoon sun like pieces of glass. I found a bench near the parking lot, the same spot where news vans had once parked. I sat there, hands trembling, heart still echoing Orion's words. When we don't understand our own hurt, we outsource it. It shows up as somebody else's worst day. I had watched my daughter's worst day unfold, like a rerun of pain she'd never finished watching. And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't evil. She was haunted. I drove to the hospital next, to Mark's room. He lay still, machines keeping him tethered to this side of existence. His chest rose and fell in small, careful movements. I sat beside him and whispered, "She didn't mean to hurt you. She's trying to learn how not to run this time." His monitor beeped steadily, indifferent but steady. And for the first time, I didn't ask God for miracles. I asked for mercy, the kind that teaches before it heals. That evening, Orion Sage found me again. Same garden, same orchids, same quiet gravity. He didn't ask what I'd learned. He didn't have to. He simply said, "You looked, didn't you?" I nodded. "And?" "She was running from a ghost named Caleb." "Good," he said. "Now she can stop." He brushed a bit of soil from his hands and looked toward the fading sky. "Remember, Evelyn, every unfinished story demands a sequel. Life will write one, whether you like it or not. But if you face it together, maybe this one ends differently." "What should I do now?" I asked. "Don't fix her," he said. "Just make the world gentle enough for her to fix herself." He turned back to the orchids, trimmed a dying leaf, and smiled faintly. "And when you visit her next time, bring forgiveness. Not as a gift, just as a seat cushion. You'll both need it." He left me with that image. The idea of forgiveness as something you sit on together, so the hard ground doesn't hurt as much. As I walked back to the parking lot, the wind carried the faintest scent of orchids and rain. I realized I hadn't cried once that day. Not because I was healed, but because, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the mirror anymore. If you're still here, thank you for staying with this grandma story. It isn't about guilt or punishment. It's about what happens when love runs out of places to hide. Tap like or share this family drama story if you've ever seen your own reflection in someone else's pain. Because sometimes that's how healing begins. Not with forgiveness, but with the courage to look long enough to recognize yourself. The following week felt different from all the others that came before. Not easier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that shows up after a long storm, when the air still smells of rain, but the thunder has finally gone to sleep. I drove back to the jail early that morning, the one I'd come to know too well. The same deputy at the desk lifted his hand in greeting. He didn't need my name anymore. I was the mother. Lydia sat waiting for me, her hair tied back, eyes swollen, but alert. When she spoke, her voice carried something new. Not the tremor of guilt, not the stubbornness of denial. Something softer, resolve. "Mom," she said, "I want to go see him." "Mark?" She shook her head. "Caleb." The name hit the air like a dropped glass. It had weight, history, and every echo of what she'd been hiding for years. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. "Then let's go see him." The visit. The nursing home sat 2 towns over, next to a lake where the geese never seemed to leave. The building was old but clean, the kind of place where sunlight had to fight its way through faded curtains. A nurse led us down a hallway lined with framed photos of volunteers and forgotten Christmases. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the faint sweetness of lavender air freshener. Mercy trying to disguise decay. When we reached Caleb's room, the nurse opened the door gently. "He's awake most days," she whispered, "but he doesn't speak much." Inside, the room was small but tidy. A few wilted flowers, a clock ticking too loudly, a Bible open on the nightstand. Caleb lay on his side, thin, gray, breathing through a small plastic tube. His eyes were closed, but his hands moved slightly under the blanket, like he was still reaching for something in a dream. Lydia froze at the door. "I don't know if I can do this." "You already are," I said. She stepped forward, trembling, clutching the letter she'd written. It was folded neatly, the edges worn from her holding it all night. I stood back, watching as she pulled a chair close to the bed. Her voice shook when she began to read. "Dear Caleb, I don't know if you'll remember the girl I used to be. The one who loved you and then left when things got hard. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only running from the kind of love that would have made me braver. I'm sorry I didn't stay that night. I'm sorry I didn't answer your calls. I'm sorry I learned too late that silence is a kind of cruelty. I carried that silence into every room I walked into my marriage, into my mother's house, into every mistake that followed. If there's anything left of that old love between us, I hope it forgives me. And if you can't forgive me, that's okay too. Just know that I finally see what I did. Thank you for teaching me what staying should have meant. Lydia. Her voice broke at his name. She folded the paper again, set it on the nightstand beside his hand. For a long moment, there was no sound except the steady beep of the heart monitor. Then Caleb's fingers twitched. His eyes opened halfway. He couldn't speak, but one tear slid down the side of his face. Lydia reached out, covering his hand with both of hers. "I'm here," she whispered. "This time, I'm not leaving." And in that fragile, impossible moment, it felt like something invisible in the room exhaled. Like the ghosts that had been watching finally stood up and walked out into the light. I turned away, pressing a hand to my mouth. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't sound like words. Sometimes it's just breath finally released. A different kind of work. The next day, Lydia called me from the jail's phone. Her voice sounded lighter, tired, but alive. "Mom, can we do something good while we wait? For Mark, I mean." That afternoon, I went to the hospital and spoke to the volunteer coordinator. They needed help in the patient garden, weeding, watering, reading to patients who couldn't leave their beds. Lydia couldn't be there, not yet, but I could, and she could write letters that I would read aloud for her. So that's what we did. Every morning, I went to the hospital with a folder of Lydia's letters. Little notes of encouragement, apologies to strangers she'd never meet, stories about the flowers that grew in the jail courtyard. One said, "You don't have to fix everything today. Just breathe. Just water what's still alive." The nurses started pinning them on the walls of patient rooms. One man, with terminal cancer, asked if he could keep his letter taped to his heart monitor. Another said, "Tell her she writes like she's praying for everyone at once." And maybe she was. I'd read each letter out loud, my voice catching sometimes when I thought of the girl she used to be, the one who thought love meant never needing help. At the end of every visit, I'd walk to Mark's room. He was still unresponsive, but I'd sit by his bed, reading Lydia's words softly into the air. "Mark, she's learning how to stay, and I think that's something worth waiting for." His heartbeat beeped slow, steady, patient. One evening, as I left the hospital, my phone rang. Unknown number. When I answered, a familiar calm voice came through. "Evening, Evelyn. Orion Sage." I smiled before I could stop myself. "You have a way of finding people who are just about to give up. Or maybe I just water the right gardens," he said, that soft humor threading through every syllable. "You heard about Lydia?" "I heard about Caleb," he said. "The nurse there volunteers with one of my students. She said a woman came to read a letter and left the room lighter." I exhaled. "He cried, Orion." "Of course he did. Forgiveness always starts with tears. They're how the soul breathes." For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of the evening wind filled the line. Then he said the thing that would stay with me forever. "Healing isn't about fixing the past, Evelyn. It's about learning to love differently next time." I let the words sink in. They fit into every corner of my story. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "you love like the past taught you something. That's all any of us can do." He paused. "Tell Lydia the same, and when she forgets, tell her again." Then the line went quiet. I stood in the hospital parking lot, phone still against my ear, watching the lights blink across the windows. Somewhere inside that building, machines were keeping people alive. But in that moment, I realized Love could do that too, quietly, invisibly, one act at a time. Weeks passed. The investigation slowed. Reporters lost interest. The world moved on, but we didn't. We kept showing up. I planted new flowers in the hospital garden. Yellow tulips, white daisies, lavender for calm. Every time I watered them, I thought of Orion's orchids, of Caleb's trembling hand, of Lydia's voice saying, "This time, I'm not leaving." When I visited the jail, Lydia's hands no longer shook. She looked out the small window of the visiting room and said, "I think I understand what Orion meant. I can't change what I did, but maybe I can make sure it means something." "It already does," I said. "You came back." The day I left, the deputy handed me another envelope. "She asked me to give you this," he said. Inside was another letter, short this time. "Mom, thank you for showing up, for making room, for reminding me that even when life breaks, love doesn't have to." At the bottom, she'd drawn a small crooked cup, the same one she'd made in 3rd grade. Underneath, one word, love. "If you're still here with me, thank you. This grandma story isn't just about pain. It's about what happens when pain finally learns how to listen." If you've ever found healing in doing good for someone else, tap like or comment, "I stayed," because sometimes that's all the miracle anyone needs to stay. It had been 3 months since the night of the cake. 3 months of sirens fading into memory, of court dates postponed, of prayers that no longer asked for miracles, only for strength. Winter had turned to spring without asking our permission. The dogwoods outside the hospital were blooming again, soft white petals trembling in the wind, like forgiveness learning to stand. Mark was still there. Room 407, second bed by the window. His body thin, his skin pale, but his heart still stubbornly beating. Every day, Lydia and I came to sit beside him. Some days, we read. Other days, we just listened to the hum of machines, to the breath that refused to quit, to the sound of our own small hope trying to sound like faith. I brought the same book every morning, the collected works of Emily Dickinson. Mark used to tease Lydia about it. "You only read poems with sad endings," he'd say. Now she smiled when I opened it, tracing the lines with her finger. "He used to say poems made him sleepy," she whispered. "Guess that part hasn't changed." We'd sit there for hours, reading aloud to a man who couldn't hear, or maybe could in some other way. And sometimes, when the words got too heavy, we'd talk instead, about the flowers outside, about Caleb, about things that didn't hurt anymore. One afternoon, Lydia looked up from the book and said quietly, "You think he knows we're here?" "I think he feels the weight of us," I said. "Sometimes that's enough." She nodded. Then she reached over and adjusted his blanket with that gentle, practiced care that only comes from love that's been burned and rebuilt. There was no bitterness left in her movements, only devotion, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. It was early, too early, when the hospital phone rang. I was at home, making coffee, the same routine I'd kept to keep my mind from wandering. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice on the other end was breathless, urgent, but not afraid. "You might want to come in." "What happened?" I asked, already grabbing my coat. He just moved his hand. For a second, I couldn't speak. The words didn't make sense, like they belonged to someone else's story. Then, the mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. But this time, I didn't cry. I ran. When I got to the hospital, Lydia was already there, standing beside the bed, her hand clamped over her mouth, tears running down her face. "Mom," she said between sobs, "he did it again. Look." Mark's right hand twitched, slow but sure. a fraction of movement that carried the weight of every prayer we hadn't dared to say out loud. His eyelids fluttered. The heart monitor beeped faster for half a second, then settled again. We both froze, afraid to breathe too loudly, as if sound might scare the miracle away. The doctor came in, smiling the cautious smile of a man who's learned never to promise too much. "It's a good sign," he said. "Sometimes the body wakes up before the mind does." "Does that mean he'll live?" Lydia asked. "It means," he said softly, "he's trying." When he left, the room fell quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet this time. Not the heavy silence of fear, the trembling silence of hope. Lydia broke down, sobbing into my shoulder, and I held her, the way I hadn't since she was small, when monsters were still imaginary and love was still easy. "Mom," she cried, "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," I said, "but you're still getting it. That's what mercy looks like." We stayed at the hospital for hours that day, watching the smallest things feel like salvation. A muscle twitch, a sigh, a heartbeat steadying under the doctor's hand. Outside, sunlight poured through the glass, warming the linoleum floors. It hit the orchids that someone had placed by the window. 3 white blooms, 1 bud just starting to open. There was no card, but I didn't need one. I knew where they came from. Orion Sage always had a way of leaving lessons without signatures. When Lydia noticed them, she smiled through her tears. "He said he didn't hover," she whispered. "He lies beautifully," I said, and we both laughed, soft, relieved laughter that belonged to people who'd spent too long without it. For a moment, everything around us glowed. The light, the machines, even the sterile walls. It wasn't that the pain had vanished. It was that we'd finally learned how to sit inside it without drowning. That evening, I sat by Mark's bed, writing in the small notebook I kept now. Not lists or grocery notes, but prayers that weren't really prayers. Maybe, I wrote, the poison was never the cake. Maybe it was our silence, our pride, our blindness. But healing, it starts the same way poison does, from the inside. I closed the notebook, exhaled, and looked at my daughter, head resting against the bed rail, hand clutching Mark's. There was no perfect ending waiting for us, no guarantee of what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't matter. We were here, together, alive enough to wait for whatever came next. As we left the hospital that night, the air was cool and clean. The moon hung low, reflected in puddles that looked like tiny mirrors. I caught our reflections there. 2 women, worn but upright, side by side. And in the faint breeze, I heard Orion's voice again, carried like a thread through the quiet. When we stop trying to fix what's broken and start learning from it, that's when life stops repeating the same lesson. I smiled at the sky, whispered back, "We're learning, Orion. We really are." Lydia slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think he'll wake up?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think we already did. The doctors never promised anything. They just said time. But maybe time isn't something that heals you. Maybe it's just the space life gives you to understand what really broke." Every morning now, I still drive to the hospital. The garden's bigger. The orchids are blooming again. And every time I see one open, I think of the man who said, "Pain is a mirror. You can break it, but it still shows you." That was Orion Sage, the man who helped me see that maybe life wasn't punishing us. It was showing us what we'd ignored, until we were ready to finally understand. I used to believe that stories like this only happened to other families, to strangers on the evening news, to people you whisper about at church. But now I know the truth. Every home holds its own mirror, and one day it shows you everything you've been too afraid to face. Maybe for you, it's forgiveness. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's the phone call you never made. For me, it was a cake, sweet on the outside, poisoned on the inside. But the poison was never the sugar. It was silence. It was the years I spent believing love meant not talking about pain. Now, I talk about it. I read to my daughter. I read to her husband. Still sleeping, still fighting, and every word feels like a seed being planted in soil that's finally ready. Because this is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not quick, not easy. Just love, staying long enough to bloom. Soft piano swells slightly. And if you've been with me through this whole grandma's story, thank you. Truly. These family drama stories aren't about villains and victims. They're about us, the people still learning how to love without hurting, how to forgive without forgetting. If this story touched you, if you saw even a small part of your own reflection somewhere inside it, share it with someone who still believes people can change. Let's keep these stories alive, not because they're perfect, but because they remind us that we're still capable of becoming better. Subscribe to PT Family Drama Stories for more grandma stories like this one. Each story is another mirror, and sometimes the thing you need most isn't a new beginning, but the courage to look at the reflection differently. Sometimes life doesn't punish us. It mirrors us. What we once ignored returns, asking to be understood.